All right, so let's get into this. 3 sessions, and look, the first session is crawl, right? So maybe a lot of you are already kind of into LLMs or agents, but some of you are not, and I just want to kind of like point out the components. And hopefully there's some takeaway anyway. Then in the second session, we're going to say like, okay, let's take those components and let's build Gen AI or agentic workflows with them, right? They're not exactly the same thing, but there's kind of a natural maturity curve. And then the third session, I am going to show you how to, well, what is these days called vibe coding, right? And once you see that, where you can literally kind of talk to a computer and the computer executes the code, that can kind of definitely can change your perspective of what AI can do today, right? I mean, you suddenly make the stretch from, oh, I've used ChatGPT a couple of times to, whoa, we're in a different era, because if you can talk to a computer and it live kind of creates what you want, that is a full different thing. All right, so look, the building block of agents, and I coined this how I gained confidence. Because if we're talking about agents, you're like, okay, oh, agents can do this, and there's a lot of promise there. But how do you actually know that it works? That's the main question, right? And the first LLMs were like super cool to see, but like if you gave them a task, they're not particularly good at that task per se. But of course, the outcome was already like mind-blowing because no one had seen that before. Write me some code, right? Write me a function in Python. It would do so. And then you would kind of like try to run it, and it was kind of full of errors, but the format was there, right? And then you're like, okay, there's an error. Can you fix this error? And it would rewrite the function, but then change all the variable names. And you're like, oh my God, now I have to kind of integrate it and then change all those variable names again, and a horrible, horrible experience. But look, that's with the newer versions of those LLMs started becoming better, better, and better. And for me, the only way to trust or understand or feel what those machines are capable of, you have to just use it, right? And once you see that it is capable of planning something, you're like, okay, that is interesting. Now, well, I have a problem that I can solve now, right? Whereas in the initial models, you could not solve that. So it all started, I think, I tried to kind of put my memory together here. So around 2019, they came out with the news, like there's some kind of a text generator from OpenAI, and people, and especially that was, I think, Elon Musk who said it, it's too dangerous to be released in public, right? Because people can do all kind of wild stuff with it. Well, at that time, my curiosity was really there. It's like, wow, what can this thing do? And they were talking about GPT-2, right, just for reference. And then, so here you see when the ChatGPT come out, I asked it to ChatGPT, it said November 30. I think I got access maybe December 1 or December 2. And this is really a screenshot. I sent this to at least 5 of my friends. I said, dude, drop everything you're doing and spend 50 minutes on this. Because I was marveled, right? And I was like, this is something new, right? And since then, right, literally like December 3, I've been playing with this stuff non-stop in any kind of way. And so today I'm surrounding myself with AI. And so this is why I think they want to say like, oh, how do you become like a 10x employee, right? But it helps me with the most crazy stuff, right? Of course, access to information and to organize and to write. And you can't think, and I'll give a number of examples here to just show that the sky is the limit. And I just took a screenshot of my latest prompts here. And you see, there's all kind of stuff that I'm asking, from IT to my car to just help me think about things. And basically, I use all those GPTs, right, or all those AIs. And my go-to models are effectively ChatGPT and Anthropic. And ChatGPT I use on my phone, my desktop, I use the API. I integrated it in a keyboard on my phone so I can talk to it. I use the chat, the speech to text, image generation, text to speech, all of it, right? And then for Anthropic, I feel so ChatGPT is super easy to kind of brainstorm with and communicate with, but Anthropic, I feel I have access to the smartest person in the world that is my friend and just sitting next to me answering any crazy question I have. And so I ended up using Cloud Code as my coding assistant. I tried all them, Cursor, Copilot, Windsurf, you name it. I think Cloud Code is just mind-blowingly good. And I'll show you all the demos that I built were built with this, right? And so in building those demos, I'm not coding, I'm talking to the computer, so it built me this and it builds me that. And I'll show those demos, and then in the third session, I'll show you how I communicate with that computer. And then Google Studio or Gemini I use, not because somehow it is not very nice at communicating to me, I find. It's not very good at coding, I find. People think differently about it, but it has a massive context length, right? So million tokens or something. So there's cases where those million context length is absolutely needed, and I go there, I paste something huge, and I compress it in one way or another, and then I continue with the other two modes. All right. So a few thoughts before we get into the real thing, right? I feel GPT, right, is like GPS. I saw my parents navigate with a map. If we went to I grew up in the Netherlands. They went to South France on vacation, and my mom with a cart, my dad driving, and I think you need to go left and right here, right? If you think of that, and now you're using GPS, you're like, of course you use GPS, and how in the world would people arrive at places without GPS, right? I mean, anyone, right? If you know the way, yes, that's easy. But if you don't know the way, can you imagine yourself using a map? I feel that our kids will use AI or will perceive AI like that, right? How can you get stuff done without this AI that's doing all kind of marvelous stuff for you? Another and this is an article that I wrote on LinkedIn, of course, with the help of AI. So the ideas are mine, but I kind of, it helps me formulate the right way to kind of carve this into an article. And the metaphor I'm using in that article is like, I feel that AI is like a horse, right? And look, if I walk from here to there, I need to use my own muscles, and I go with my own speed, and I probably get there. But if I'm on a horse, I'm a lot faster. So I'm effectively using the muscles of the horse. However, and there's one important thing, right? I am sitting on the horse, and I'm holding the reins. And if I'm not properly holding the reins, that horse will just kind of start eating grass somewhere on the side, because it has kind of its own ideas or its own desire to do things, and that does not necessarily serve me. So I feel that if I use AI, I get to places way faster, but it's me who hold the reins. And I need to kind of navigate this horse very, very strategically, very carefully to get where I want, but then I get there way faster than I could ever get there with my own muscles. All right. So, look, I'm not going to go a long time in this slide, but I'm just to say, there's of course always the question like, okay, but is it safe to put all your stuff up in GPT or whatever AI you use? And you can just ask, of course, or look at those policies and see what is capable, what is retained, what is not retained. Do they do PII detection, removal, etc.? And so if you have the enterprise licensing, at least of OpenAI, you see your content or the stuff that you submit is not reused for training, right? And there's like a retention policy set by the admin and etc. So I think with the proper guardrails, I feel confident that what I send up into, and in this case OpenAI, it is fair. But of course, this is something that you need to kind of take up with your own compliance department, and they need to give that approval. But those things are properly outlined, and that is what should be discussed in the first place. All right, so this was basically the introduction. We start with LLMs, and then we slowly move towards agents. What is an agent? Well, but the first, we need to put some definitions up, right? So an LLM, in the simplest way, right, we all know this chat interface. I can ask, well, what's an anti-metabol, right? Give me an example, right? That is basically, I use that LLM for its knowledge, right? So I always imagine I go to the belly, or the thing goes to its own belly, and it's like, oh, anti-metabol, I've seen that in context, poof, here's the answer. But in many cases, you use the LLM not as a source of knowledge per se, but as an operator, right? And if you kind of see that difference, that is for me a helpful concept, right? So if I say summarize the following customer feedback into key pain points, and then I give some context, it will operate on that context. So you have, and that context can of course be something that you paste in there, or something that you retrieve from a database dynamically, and then we get to the RAG context that we'll discuss later. But that is a fundamentally different thing than using an LLM as a source of knowledge, right? And I feel like understanding that difference clearly helps you, because if you ask like, okay, for my company, what is the right policy? Obviously, that it will not be in the belly of GPT unless that was exposed during training, which is unlikely. So then you have to provide your own context, and it will operate on that context, and it can give you the right answer. Right. So then we talk about AI, and then over LLMs, and then agents, and agents use tools, right? And it sounds very magic, but if I just ask in ChatGPT, show me a REST call to a weather API, right? It knows that, right? So it says like, okay, here you go. And it's a curl, which is a command to execute that actually. And it gives the open weather map, and it gives some keywords for location and whatnot. So if you understand that it can generate that kind of code, it's a very small step to see that you can feed also that code directly, right, into an execution engine. So I can say, well, show me a REST call to a weather API, and only show the code, no other output, right? Poof, there I have exactly the code, and that code is taken and executed. So now we suddenly have a tool use, right? So the tool use is nothing magical. It's just an LLM generating text, and that text happens to be code. Right. Here is an other very useful pattern, right? You start with an LLM, you ask for code generation, and that code generation has some result, right? I teach my daughter music. I love music. I have like 50 different instruments at home that I kind of half play, and just for the fun of it, nothing professional, but I want, my daughter is 5. I want her to learn to read notes, right? So, well, what can you do? You can send her to a piano teacher at age 5. You can go online and buy some books. But look, maybe 99 out of 100 people do that. I ask GPT, right? Because that's somehow my inclination. And I say, look, create in Python a definition of a MIDI file where you only use the notes from the central C to the A above, and provide 50 measures with one note each, where you start with the notes C to A annotated and only show the Python code, right? Poof, it says, here's your MIDI file. Now I have a piece of code in Python, right, that I save, and I say execute. And this executes, and it produces the result that you see on the right? And this is a real example, right? I show this to my daughter, say, here, you have the first notes, annotate the rest. And at first she's like, do I really have to? But she did, and now at age 5 she reads notes. Right? I mean, it's a simple example, but you see that this pattern from LLM to code to result is a very useful one, and it's extremely versatile. All right, just to show that maybe you think like, well, that's a specific example. Here is on the top of 14-page article that I wrote on LinkedIn, and we may discuss that later on. It's 14 pages. Of course, I wrote that with the help of AI. I think it's an interesting experiment that I conducted. But then I ask, and again, this is the operator mode of the LLM, right? Above, here's an article that I wrote. I think it's an interesting conclusion. I want you to create a visualization of what I did, and I prefer you doing this, for example, in GraphViz or in SVG, right? So that's a coding for graphical elements or for graphical design. And it produces that SVG, and then when I compile that, it generates the image below, right? And so again, like if you're thinking, if I would just ask this directly, generate me an image of, right? Then you know what happens. So GPT is capable of generating images, but if you have ever tried that and it needs to contain text or something, it messes up the text or comes up with something that is like more pictorial than graphical, right? Or than some kind of an organization of information. The other thing that you can learn from this is, look, this is 14 pages of text, huh? And this describes in detail an experiment that I did. And so apparently this GPT is so smart that it can fully understand what I did there. And then with this simple prompt, right, create a visualization of what I did, coming up with this. Now, I must say it's a little bit stylized because it was not this only prompt, right? Poof, here we have the picture. You need to do a little bit back and forth and to get to something. But at the end of the day, this is marvelous, right? That you can generate these kind of complex graphical representations of something that is even more complex to read. Because if you need to read through those 14 pages, right? Imagine that I have to ask a graphical designer, right? So like, oh, I wrote an article. And well, first of all, I have to explain what I did and what graphical design I want out of it. Or the graphical designer has to read through all those 14 pages and then kind of like feel what I want. And then he has to work for an hour, right? Now this is done in 10 minutes. So you start seeing this compression of time that takes place with just using AI efficiently. That's just incredible. All right, so another common pattern is you have some objective and you want some strategic planning, right? And this is a silly example, but like I want to define a marketing strategy, list the sub-steps to take without further explanation. Sure, it says here's the sub-steps, right? And of course, you can imagine that you have a loop going on. It says like, okay, take another step, step number 7, and you ask the same thing. Here's another set of sub-steps. And so you now start to kind of see, okay, that's kind of getting towards agentic, right? And so in a way, right, I want to take the magic out of agents. Because this whole agent, this concept of agents is like, oh, yeah, you can do anything and pulls data from anywhere. There's a number of steps or number of components that we create agents with. And those are just LLM calls, if you will, right? Where you prompt exactly what you want this LLM to do, right? Create goals, right? And we call it planner or task decomposition. Well, that's a lot of nice words that you put in a box for just asking, I have an objective here and list the sub-steps, right? Then you can imagine you have some kind of a goal or task queue, right? So you put that list in some queue and so like, okay, you execute the first thing and then you cross it off your list, right? It can do that. Of course, there's some iterative part here. We discussed the tool executor, right? So you have some API call. I want to make an API call too, and it produces the code for doing that, and you execute that code. Reflection, that is also a very nice word because we as humans have a particular idea with reflection, but effectively it's like, did you do what you promised to do? And think about that or consider that. This is your input, this was your goal, this is your output, evaluate that. And so then we call that reflection. Okay. Then there's things like more elusive maybe in memory or knowledge base. I'm going to show you a few of those things. Look, for me, an agent is an LLM with some of those components. People will tell you the most beautiful things about what agents are capable of. I feel that the design today is highly experimental, but highly useful, right? But there's no one set way to do an agent, right? And if you're talking about memory, for example, you're thinking like, okay, well, what does memory mean? Well, if you look at ChatGPT, the conversation. That means that every time you send in a new answer, truly what happens in the background, it takes your whole conversation history and sends that back to GPT, and then it produces the next answer, for as long as the context length allows that. Okay, that's a very expensive way, right? So maybe in the agent that you create in your organization, you only need access to the last 2 conversation terms. Or maybe you have a way to say, well, I take the conversation so far and I summarize it and I kind of create an additive summary. That is very possible as a memory pattern. Of course, now you spent a few extra tokens for creating a memory element, but so it's just to say that we're talking about memory. This is all not yet like crystallized how you do this in practice, and it depends on the use case how you make that work, and it's just experimenting to see what works. And we start seeing the kind of contours of it, right? Because obviously you have an LLM core and then you have the security and the guardrails and all that. But I feel the message, the broader message here is like believe that don't believe that this is a fixed thing from now on. All right, so look, this was called a hands-on session, and so hands-on means like you all bring your computers and then you open your computer and you start doing stuff, right? That is for me hands-on. But apparently there was a miscommunication because they told me no, it's you hands-on, Olav. You're going to do hands-on. Okay, yet I designed something that was actually usable for all of you. And so, look, we talked a little bit in the roundtable about how do you get confidence in those things, or how do you convince maybe upper management to use those tools? And for me, it is learning by doing, right? If you see that RAG, and I'll talk towards that it works, then you're like, that's cool, I can use that, right? And so by doing, you have to have some kind of a mechanism to which you have your own document, you upload that, and you start querying it. So I built that, and so for the period of the conference or a few days after, I will have this online. If you are interested, please come see me. I'll give you the password and the URL, and please feel free to try it. It is meant kind of, you're not going to upload your confidential documents there, let me state that, but obviously all those documents are not going to be exposed anywhere else. The other thing I want to invite you to, if you think this works, right, or you like this, I'm most happy to vibe code, right, like a specific solution for your company that somehow works. Okay, so with that introduction, let me show you this small demo. I have a lot of demos built for this, but this is the AWS Bedrock RAG demo. So effectively, my idea was like, you're all gonna do this, right? So I can't start giving you AWS credentials and you log in and then you did like a complex interface with all bells and whistles. So I like, let me ask my AI to code a very thin layer on top of the bedrock so you can still play around with it. And so it works as follows, right? You create a folder, you create a description, and then it will you throw your documents in there. And here you see this is a small AI blogs. This is another nice use case. I talked with marketing for about an hour on the phone, on a call, about AI implementation. And I then said, like, so send me the transcript. And I took that transcript, put it in a GPT, and said like, okay, carve 6 articles out of this, right? And of course, those articles still need to be a little bit kind of modified and made in the specific form marketing wanted it. But rather than having to deal with like a 1-hour transcript after which you have to derive the articles yourself, now I had 6 articles to start with, right? And imagine again, like if you have to write that, going from an hour conversation where all the information is shared, it's like, oh yeah, we want an article about that. I go and I sit and I write for a day and I have 1 article or half a day, right? Now it's done in half an hour, Okay, so just for the fun of it, I put those documents in here. Then you go here, you say, I want to create a RAG solution out of it. You point to your folder, and you choose a chunking size, of course. Look, in reality, there's some other choices to be made. I made it so simple that you say, create the RAG solution, and here you have your RAG database, and then, of course, you can test it, right? So here, I showed that you select, for example, the AI Summit blog, right? And then you can write your query. Tell me what is a right way to do AI or to implement AI agents in an enterprise. I mean, that was at the end of the day what this whole conversation was about. So you see, I no longer type, right? Because typing is very lengthy. So I talked to my computer. And now, given this query, what it does, and I can go into all kind of detail in how a vector database works and embedding and all the technical stuff. But at the end of the day, you have a query, you have your own policy documents, they're retrieved in some way or another, and then with that context, that question is answered, right? So here I say, like, what is the right way to implement AI agents in an enterprise? Well, here we go, right? This is the generated answer. Start with a clear business objective, customize agents with the stakeholders, build a domain-trained foundation, yada, yada. Well, this is probably a fair kind of summary of what I said in those 6 articles. And then here you can say, what are the raw chunks, right? So it retrieves chunks, and you see here, there's kind of like, those are pieces of the articles that are all stuck together. This is unreadable, but that's what comes back using this RAG solution. All right. So, look, I would just recommend whether you want to use this specific thing or you build this yourself, do this, right? This is the foundation of about everything. If you want to have an agent in your organization, it will use your organization's own data. And the very first thing you want to do is make sure that if you put your data in there and you start asking it questions, it gives the right answers. And if it gives the right answers and you make a little report out of that and you show that to people, they're like, huh, okay, well, that can be useful. Now that's a first step. Right? And once that first step is there, you can start building it. You're going to make it bigger, you're going to make a chatbot out of it, and et cetera, et cetera. Okay, the other thing that I kind of encapsulated from AWS Bedrock is the guardrails. Right? And again, here, it's super important to make sure that if you bound somehow your chatbot, especially if you expose them to customers, right? I think if one of the first examples was a car dealer that proudly announced, like, oh, we have a chatbot to answer questions, and someone kind of hacked into that thing or prompt injected it such that it said, like, oh yeah, I'm going to give you a car away for free. I don't know if they honored that, but like obviously you do not want to get in that situation. And the other thing is like, what do you want to block, right? Violence, insults, misconduct, and whatnot. You have denied topics that you can configure. You can put word filters in there. You can filter out all kind of sensitive information. Now, the whole point of this demo is you going in there, configure it, and then play with it, see if it works, right? And so just as a small demonstration, I said here, test. I select the guardrail. I select no animals, right? It's a very simple thing. Right? And so what I'm going to say here is, I love my cars. I have a Ford and a Jaguar, right? And you see that, so this is, Ford is misspelled, I guess, right? So we do this. So obviously this is not about animals. So the question is, will the guardrail be smart enough to understand this, right? And it says, so we have the raw model output and we have the guardrail output. Right? And he says, like, that's a nice combination, right? And it does point out that it wonders if it's a Ford vehicle and a Jaguar as a big cat. But if I just would say I have a Jaguar, you'll see what happens here. and that says like, your input was blocked by guardrail. Super small demonstration, but look, this is what I mean with like experimenting with this stuff, right? If you just try things out, see if it blocks. If you put like sensitive IP or network information and whatnot, then you can see how well it blocks it and what it does. All right, so we are here. So now what you just saw was an application that is like obviously run in or not obviously, but in Bedrock. It's run in AWS. It's S3 based. It's semantic search, LLMs via Bedrock. There's guardrails. It has like session-based security. It has a front end in React, a back end in Node Express. It's deployed in AWS Beanstalk in a Docker solution with an application load balancer in front of it and auto scaling, and I can go on, right? And you think like, oh, okay, this guy now must be some AWS dude that he has certificates to build all this. No, I use AI, right? Because what do I know about AWS? But I'm going to go into ChatGPT and say like, help me deploy this. What do I need? And you see that where I guess normally the amount of applications you have to go through to understand all this, you spend maybe a year and a half to get to that knowledge level. You now do it in a matter of months, right? Or 1 month to understand the full complexity of a proper deployment. And so this is again like an example of how you compress timelines using AI. All right, so I'm out of time here. This was the end of this first session. Later this afternoon, we're going to do session 2, where we look at the different components and then build kind of Gen AI workflows out of that. All right.
Thank you.